started shortly. We are just waiting for a few other people to join. And in the meantime, I'll go through a little housekeeping. So thank you for everyone that's attending. This is the presentation on the Central Pine Barrens Prescribed Fire Program. I'm Polly Wiegand. I'm the Science and Stewardship Program Manager for the Central Pine Barrens Commission. Joining today is Bob Panko, who is our Fire Management Specialist, and Sabrina Cohn, who is our Ecological Field Specialist. So Bob will be presenting with me today on the program, and Sabrina is providing the tech support and helping and make sure everybody is able to respond with questions and ask questions. We are doing a dual live broadcast on Zoom as well as on YouTube. So if you are logging in on either platform, you can ask questions as we go along in that platform. And you, at the end, if you're on Zoom, we will open up, you can raise your hand, and if you'd like to ask your question in person rather than in text, we can do that. So I just want to get rid of that screen. Hold on a second.
Yeah, so Polly, as we go too, I would say that you probably won't be able to use my cursor because you'll have the master screen.
Yes, you can use your mouse, Bob, but it won't show up on the screen.
Yeah,
so
that's what I mean.
I'll be your Vanna.
Okay.
So, all right. So hopefully everyone can see the screen, and we will roll through with the program. So as I mentioned, I am Polly Wiegand. I am the Science and Stewardship Program Manager for the Central Pine Barrens Commission. And we are excited to offer this evening program for the public on our Prescribed Fire Program. Our goal is, as it highlights here, is to protect public safety and ecological health. So the topics that we're going to cover today is really to introduce the Central Pine Barrens Commission for those that are not familiar with what we do here, and also talk a little bit about the importance of the fire history and the ecology related to the Pine Barrens and why we're using prescribed fire as a management tool. Bob will roll into the fire program, its need and its importance, and go through our programmatic goals as it relates to the fire program, as well as the planning, the operations, the notifications. And then we'll wrap up a little bit about the education and outreach information and how you can also protect your home from wildfire on different planning objectives in that accord. So the Central Pine Barrens Joint Planning and Policy Commission, this is the boundary that we cover in central and eastern Suffolk County, was established in 1993 through an act of the legislature. There was many years of advocacy and effort that went into appealing to the legislators in New York State to protect this very ecologically valuable and deep water recharge area of Long Island, and to protect in public trust for indefinitely, so that we would retain those ecological services, the valuable habitat, and the benefits of protecting our groundwater. Uniquely, the Central Pine Barrens does provide a sense of place on Long Island due to this ecological uniqueness, but it also has a high value culturally, tending back to the Native Americans and then with European colonization. So the protected area is 106,000 acres currently, and it covers the 3 towns of Brookhaven, Riverhead, and Southampton. It's also within Suffolk County, as I mentioned, and there's 2 different land use overlays that relate to the public protection and use for these areas. So the dark green areas are the core preservation area. That's where development is prohibited without a hardship waiver. And then the areas in light green are the compatible growth areas. And so development can occur within these areas, but that has to be in compliance with the Central Pine Barrens land use plan and also within the town zoning regulations. The light green area is really planned from a land use perspective to serve as a transitional buffer area from the more developed areas. So there's most of the lands in there predominantly are privately owned, with the dark green areas being predominantly public lands that are protected. But within both, there's public and private interspersed. So the buffer area is really to provide that transitional area of habitat and homes so that you don't have a hardscape around our natural areas similar to Central Park, where the development butts right up against the natural areas. So the reasons why there was this initiative to establish the Central Pine Barrens protection area and the commission itself is because the Central Pine Barrens is a globally rare ecosystem. It's found only along the Atlantic seaboard on coastal sands. It's one of the only places in the world where these coastal plain these sand plain grasslands exist. And they support a high level of endemic or species that are not found anywhere else in the world, that has high richness. And then the species that inhabit it are unique assemblages. Some are common and unique, and others are very rare and endangered and threatening. The other aspect that makes this ecosystem unique is that it has been formed across hundreds of thousands of years, and modified through the different forces, predominantly through fire. And through those formidable forces with fire, it has created this globally rare ecosystem that is dependent on fire. The amount of rarity is really highlighted and exhibited here. In this chart, the coastal plain pond edge holds the highest number of rare and endangered species of any ecosystem found in New York State. And then the pitch pine pine oak forest, which is highly abundant on Long Island, holds just the next highest level of rare and endangered species, followed by the maritime grasslands, the Atlantic plain, white cedar swamp, which is found uniquely on Long Island, and then the dwarf pine plains, which is found here in West Hampton, where our office is. The dwarf pine plains is an ecosystem that's only found in 2 locations on coastal sands here and in New Jersey. So they're highly unique and diverse ecosystems, and the efforts go into protecting these systems. As I mentioned prior, it's really the local and natural conditions of our ecosystem that really drive the species diversity. And so understanding the ecology of the Pine Barrens is critical. In order to do that, we have to really refine down and look at the base material and the formidable forces that created it. And so on Long Island was created by the recession of the Wisconsin Glacier that left terminal moraines and sand outwashes. And in that material, you had glacier till and extremely sandy soils. And over time, vegetation has inhabited those areas, but the underlying soils of our areas, extremely sandy, extremely acidic, very low calcium. And because of that, it contains a very low organic matter in these glacial soils. And that drives a very droughty environment, and very warm and very nutrient poor that supports environments where the plant material has to be able to survive in very xeric or droughty, dry-like desert conditions. And also, when we look at the topography related to these sand plain areas, we have very limited topography with the exception, but even in the terminal moraines. So most of our topography and the fire that's carried in our natural environment is carried by the steady winds, both the onshore winds and offshore winds that occur daily on Long Island. So when wildfires develop, it's the winds that carry the fire across the lands because of the limited topography. The maritime climate is also very influential in driving the droughtiness, the high humidity at time, and the harsh salt exposure that occurs during storms. So this all brings together this plant material that survives on Long Island that has to be adapted not only to fire, but also to very droughty conditions. and that creates very waxy, very consumable and flammable material. When you look at the difference between an oak leaf versus a maple leaf, an oak leaf, when it dries, it curls up and it creates an uncompacted layer of organic matter on the ground. So when a fire blows through the surface of our understory, it's able to be carried because there's a lot of air in that fuel with those leaves that have been deposited on the ground. Where if you look at a maple forest, the leaves dry flat, they compact, and they hold a lot of moisture. So in a maple forest, you tend not to have it be a fire dependent system because fire is prohibited generally from moving through those systems because they can hold more of that moisture and compact the organic matter layer down. So the key benefits of fire in these fire dependent ecosystems is that when you have a very droughty environment and very low organic matter, the soils aren't able to retain the nutrients. So through consumption, that releases the nutrients and increases the availability of nutrients. It also reduces the fuels on the ground. So fire, contrary to what you would think, but wildfire and prescribed fire are beneficial because they reduce the fuel buildup over time in our forests. It also helps reduce disease and pests. It's a natural pest control and reduces those diseases that build up in the populations through direct consumption. It also helps to maintain fire-dependent species like the pitch pine, which need the heat from the fire to burn off the waxy coating on the serotinous cones and burn off that organic material that's built up on our sandy soils so that there's ideal space and nutrient resources and sunlight for the next generation of these plants to continue on. So in that accord, it provides critical habitat as well. Species like the buck moth, the coastal buck moth, needs those openings in which to pupate and continue its next generation. And without those openings in our soil, and the insects are not able to pupate underground and protect themselves from wildfire. And overall, by having a healthy and functional system with its direct driver and modifier of the system related to fire really improves the ecosystem function because you're thinning out the forest, you're providing the space for the plants and animals to grow and flourish, you're providing a readily and ample source of nutritious plant material, and that forces those species to be able to reproduce, continue the next generation, but also to cleanse the water that we utilize as our drinking water in our sole source aquifer. So fire on the Pine Barrens is not, it's been here for hundreds and thousands of years. Wildfires sparked through lightning. I was hiking through Hubbard County Park the other day and found an amazing tree that was struck by lightning. And you could see the path of the lightning as it grounded down onto the root system. While lightning does occur frequently here, it also is generally accompanied by rainfall. So it's less likely that lightning is causing wildfires in the east as it does in the west, but it is still a source of ignition in creating wildfires on Long Island. Most prominently, though, it's been the intentional use of fire by Native Americans over 10,000 years ago to improve their home sites, reduce diseases and pests that I mentioned, to increase forage or fruit set on species like blueberries and huckleberries that then otherwise provide mastings and fruit for deer and game. Europeans also, when they came in, clear cut and maximally expanded the central pine barrens through the use of cordwood, through that cut material, and charcoal. And through that, the ecosystem responded maximally, creating pitch pine forests and scrub oak. They also adopted a lot of the Native American practices of the use of fire, but transitioned and used that fire more in a different seasonality than the Native Americans have. But unfortunately, over time, there is a culture of fire suppression that developed because the pitch pine scrub oak lands came in after the massive clear cutting, and with the encroachment of humans and negligence, it really caused massive outbreaks of wildfire that were very devastating. So more relevantly, land managers over the last 100 years have been utilizing prescribed fire to improve habitats, recognizing that these are fire-dependent ecosystems. But we've also duly seen, as this chart exemplifies, that there has been an increase in sustained fire suppression that has been detrimental to the pine barrens as far as increasing wildfire risk and declining the ecosystem health. And that's related to urbanization. So as we've continued to build and encroach within these pine barren systems, we've been trying to protect our homes and businesses and that development through the suppression of wildfires and public safety. So when we look at that history of wildfire suppression, the effort that we're advancing through our prescribed fire program is really to help mitigate the effects of that wildfire suppression that's been occurring to date. So in that accord, Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming in and participating with us here. My name is Bob Panko. I'm the fire management specialist here at the Central Pine Barrens. I've been in this position for a little over almost 2.5 years now. In a previous life here, I worked for 36 years for the U.S. National Park Service, and I been a prescribed burn boss on a national level since 1995. Last 11 years of my career was as the fire and aviation manager of Everglades National Park, where we did an awful lot of prescribed burning. When I first started in this job here, one of my first tasks was to write a comprehensive prescribed fire management plan for this landscape. And as part of that, I studied the fire history here. Now, the fire history, not as clear as one might think it could have been or should have been. And that's just because a lot of different people have had responsibility for it over the years. But one of the greatest pieces of research work that I've relied highly upon was a study that was completed in 1994 by a man named Andrew Windich, who worked for the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey and was tasked with trying to recreate the fire history of the Central Pine Barrens. What he did was he got aerial photos going back to the 1930s. That was the oldest aerial photos he could find. So he had a series of aerial photos from decade after decade after decade. And he used those aerial photos to outline the fire scars he could see on those. And he then transposed those drawings onto USGS quad maps in a collection. He also verified fires he could by researching records. So it was whether it be municipal records of fire departments, whether it be New York State Department of Environmental Protection records that he had. And he also went out and did some site survey stuff, did some charcoal, did some tree chronological analysis. And he came up with a comprehensive study that described the fires that he was able to identify from 1931 until 1994. I concentrated within his study on the large fires, and large fires by definition under the federal national level, a large fire is defined as a fire of 100 acres or more in timbered country, in forested land. So, and I did that because it's the large fires that really are the ones that impact the ecosystem. Those are the ones that really drive the disturbance. In the case here, Windich was able to see where those fire scars were, because basically the story in these pitch pine forests is that they live to crown. So they're pretty much a stand replacement, fire situation, and especially when factors are in alignment. When you look at the history of the fires, I dug up, and the other thing is that most people thought, like the Sunrise Fire of 1995, those fires that we had there, and Rocky Point Fire of 1995, they were like, the ultimate fires that ever occurred here. Well, it turned out that Sunrise Fire was the third largest that we had on these records, and Rocky Point was the fifth largest. And here you see the listing of the top 10 fires that spanned the decades. The important thing to look at those, and the map on your left is depicting them, and they are color coded by decade. The chart on your right is a really telling kind of chart, important chart, because if I looked and saw how many large fires occurred by decade, you can see in the 30s there were 6 large fires, in the 40s there were 7 large fires, in the 50s 7 large fires, and in the 60s 10 large fires, and so on as you go through this whole series. I will tell you this, that the large fire years were always, at least what I could put together in modern history, where I had rainfall records, et cetera, from the 1930s forward, they always occurred during drought cycles. So factors had to be in alignment for these large fires to occur. And those drought cycles, in the 30s and 40s, you had some drought cycles. In the 60s, you definitely had, the mid 60s, a real good drought cycle. In the 1980s, you had another good drought cycle. And we had another good drought cycle in 1995. The thing that's really jumps out at you is that since the 3 large fires that we had in the 1990s, there have been only one large fire, one fire that exceeded 100 acres in the subsequent 25 years now, going on 27 years now. And that has some serious implications. One is that the implication is inconsistent with the natural fire history. And when I say natural fire history, yeah, a lot of those fires were all probably caused by humans, but it's still, when alignment and factors are there, the fires burn. As Polly said earlier, it doesn't matter if it's a prescribed burn that we do or if it's a wildfire, they have those impacts on the ecosystem. If you look at the implications there, so, fuels are accumulating. I've got a place here in the Sarnoff State Forest that's nearby our office that it's not had a fire in it in 100 years. The pitch pine forest there, very big, mature pitch pine forest, is literally waiting in scrub oak that's up to its navels there. And, not a normal, natural situation. Those kind of accumulations of fuel call for a high risk for an intense wildfire. And it does demonstrate the need to have to replace the disturbance on the ground. Moving on, Polly, that will. There we go. So why prescribed fire? Well, I mean, we know that we can mechanically treat and we can get some results. But what I look at here, when we mechanically have treated some of these areas in the Central Pine Barrens that have been done by DEC to date in the last 3 years, all you do is rearrange the fuels. You don't eliminate the fuel loading. If you've got those scrub oaks that are underneath pitch pines that are 13 feet tall and you reduce them with mastication, all you've done is change the arrangement of the fuels. The fuel loading is still there. So we need to get into those areas here and use prescribed fire to reduce that fuel loading to a more natural situation. And next slide, please, Polly. There's a lot to the pictures that are in this slide. It's so true that wildfire, as in most wildfire prone environments that were created in wildfire, it's not a question of if there will be a wildfire, it's a matter of when. On the left-hand side, you see the Crescent Bow fire. That was in April of 2012. It's going to have a 10th anniversary this year. That was a fire that got up and had a head of steam and went over 1,000 acres in April of 2012. And you can look and see that prescribed fire, this where there was no prescribed fire around there. They did some defense of these homes. But if you're going to have that volatile kind of fire situation out there in these wildlands with the urban interface immediately adjacent, you definitely need to have some kind of fuel reduction things going on in there. If you look at the right-hand side, if you look at the development here, so this depicts an area that I've written the burn plan for. It's called south of Kearns Fields Woodlands, and it's a 123 acre burn unit. And it includes some areas that have been treated and masticated and some areas that have not. But the thing I want to point out, here's a 1947 aerial photo. It's kind of cool to see the big fire breaks up in top. That was part of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, had a transmitter station up there in the Rocky Point area. And they had these 200, 300 foot wide fire breaks cut around it to protect their infrastructure and their towers. Kearns Field doesn't even exist on this. And you can see there's very little development, even though there are some roads going through there. As we go on to the next year, 62, you're starting to see, well, one, Kearns Field has been established and cleared as an agricultural field. And you start seeing subdivisions starting to push up from Middle Country Road, east of Kearns Road. If you look in 1970, you see a little more agricultural development off to the east. You see a little bit more subdivision development along the middle of that, what would be eventually become Coventry Manor. And as we move on to the next area, see 1978, here's Coventry Manor subdivision that's fully established there now, been built on that landscape. Now, all those years from the 40s forward to what I'm looking at right now, what we're looking at right now, there were no fires that occurred in that area. So what happens here? So here's 1978. We go ahead to the next slide. 1980, multiple fires that occurred in the 1980s all around that subdivision, and including right where they were putting in the foundations of some of those houses in the Coventry Manor subdivision. As we move forward, so this was 1980. Here's a 1994 photo. You'll see here now, I did include the Rocky Point fire of 1995 in this photo just because it gives perspective. But I draw your attention that fire number 132, that occurred in April of 1993. It was only a 32 acre fire, but look at the footprint of where it's at. And then you look at the next available, the aerial photo that we've got. And what did we do right here? By 2001, we're building a subdivision. The preserve subdivision is being constructed on the fire scar that occurred only a few years earlier. And as we go on, we see that if you look in the overall mosaic here, all these subdivisions that are right there, all the development is in an area that has had a pretty active fire history. And if you go one more slide there, Polly, it goes on to show even in the 2000s, we had a couple of small fires that were right in that area. But so this is definitely a fire prone area. The one thing I'd really love to point out too is if you look north of Kearns Field, you could see where the old RCA fire break was. And what's really interesting, where in those areas where they scraped down to bare mineral soil, what do you wind up with in subsequent years but a hedgerow of pitch pines that just love to thrive in that pure mineral soil sand. So those areas have been fixed up. Okay, we can move on ahead. Basically, in this slide, just talking about some of the responsibilities. Since I believe it was the 60s, late 60s, when the Department of Environmental Protection no longer had the Central Pine Barrens or Long Island as part of one of its fire management districts. So elsewhere in the state, like up in the Adirondacks, et cetera, the wildland fire management is under control of the New York State DEC and a shared responsibility with the local fire departments. In the late 60s, I believe it was, if not early 70s, DEC was pulled out of here. At that point, command of all of its wildfires, whether it had switched over now to all the various municipal fire departments that are here. You can see in the lower right, there's an outline of the municipal departments. If you look in the 106,000 acres of the Central Pine Barrens, we have 16 fire districts that are really all right on top. They all are in most part have had some pretty robust fire histories in them. And for the fire departments, they have a high risk in suppressing wildfires. Their tactics are to go direct right against it, to try to minimize acreage and reduce the fire spread. Sometimes they'll do, the frontal assault, the tactics. I just say, to benefit for them, prescribed fire management, we can't prescribe burn thousands and thousands of acres. But what we can do is focus our prescribed burns into areas of high urban interface infrastructure. So when we do those kind of burns, when we are done with those burns, they decrease those risks to firefighters in protecting those urban interface areas. They reduce the risks of property and equipment loss resulting from wildfires. They reduce, and prescribed fire has definitely been shown nationally, time and time and time again, to reduce wildfire intensity when wildfires do come into areas that have been prescribed for fire managed. And in our case here, we're putting those prescribed fires near developments to help reduce the threats to those developments. In reducing the overall fuels in the forest, we're reducing forest hazards. And prescribed burning also gives us an opportunity for fire management personnel, both on the wildland arena or in the structural fire arena, to have a better discourse and talk about how different ways and different tactics that we can do to try to control wildfires when they do occur. Okay. There's a lot in this slide in here. I would focus on this, is that, some of the benefits, and Polly's already alluded to some of these, maintains unique species to pine barrens. As I've been working on writing burn plans now, I've been referring to the New York State Natural Heritage Database and to their professionals that also manage that data. It's not only the flora and fauna that are within the pine barrens that are the unique species and that require the fire disturbance and open ground to perpetuate their species, but it's also the habitats themselves are at risk. The pitch pine forest, the dense pitch pine forest, unique at-risk kind of habitat. The dwarf pine forest, as Polly said, globally threatened species, globally rare, only occurs in 2 places in the dwarf pines. A species that itself, the habitat is identified as a threatened area that needs this kind of disturbance in it. So what does fire do? It also thins damaged and unhealthy trees. It reduces the diseases and pests. And the southern pine beetle infestations that we've had is a great indicator of degraded forest health, that it spreads so readily because of overstocking, because of lack of disturbance in that forested area. So it's talking about that, overstocking. Hey, when we do prescribed fire, especially in combination with some mechanical treatments, it does open up the space and light availability, ensures a sustainable habitat that species that need those kind of patches of open in the understory will get those. And it really keeps the pine in the pine barrens. It's if it weren't for fire, pines might not sustain in this area. All right. what's gone on in history? Well, I won't belabor everybody here with how prescribed fire has been managed throughout the United States, but I'll just say succinctly that in the southern United States, pine plantation management has always been traditional about doing underburning. Unfortunately, they've even gotten away from that down there and have relied more on mechanical and or chemical thinning underneath their understories at places instead of prescribed burnings. Forest Service in national forests in Florida started prescribed burning in the 1940s. They were just kind of copying their neighbors who were pine plantation timber production companies doing the prescribed burning. 1958, National Park Service began prescribed burning in the National Park Service in Block B of Everglades National Park. The first prescribed burn that was done in the National Park Service land. So a long history of that. Obviously, the New Jersey folks managing their pine barrens have been managing wildfire for many, many years, and also a combination of burning along with those. Mr. Dave Crary, the Cape Cod National Seashores Program, especially in the last 25 years under Mr. Crary's leadership, has really been well established, and again dealing with a pitch pine habitat in an urban interface area, much like Long Island. Albany Pine Bush, again, established in 1991 as far as starting to prescribe burning. They have a good 30-year culture of prescribed burning up there. This picture on the left is 1997. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation conducted its prescribed burn in the Central Pine Barrens. It was in April of 1997 up in the Rocky Point State Forest. And another little landmark change we could say is that under grant from New York State DEC, the Central Pine Barrens Commission has established a program here to where we are taking some leadership in planning and implementation of prescribed fire and interagency coordination. And moving ahead, Polly, we look and say, so all this stuff we've been saying is stuff that's been said for many, many years. Here it is, April 26th, first prescribed burn, little article from the New York Newsday, highlighted little things there, not another sunrise fire, but a controlled burn intentionally to keep natural fires from raging out of control. Such planned fires can make it easier to fight wildfires in the long run and are regularly used upstate. And, talking about that people at that time especially are concerned that when we would do these fires, they have the little Bambi syndrome here, is that like, oh, it's going to be terrible for the wildlife. And we know it's, so even back in 1997, people are saying, okay, the way we're doing these burns allows the wildlife to escape. The things that we really know now is that if it weren't for wildfires or for fires, most of the denizens, the fauna that lives in those forests wouldn't even be here because they are fire dependent species. I would just say on this, we set out, one of the first tasks was to come up with a comprehensive plan to say how we were going to do this on a larger scale basis and a broader scale basis. And if you can go back one slide there, Polly, with that came in, I really wanted to talk about that. Whoops. Uh-oh. There we go. I really wanted to talk about the landscape. Yeah. So we broke the 106,000 acres into 5 fire management units. And these fire management units were based on defensible geographic boundaries, definable geographic boundaries, fire history, ecosystem, ecotone, dwarf pines fire management unit. Hey, that's there because it's mostly dwarf pines, right? So they all have their different characteristics and they're well described in that plan. Of those, there's substantial fire history in all of those areas from 1930s forward. Yeah. The goals of this comprehensive plan were to increase that public safety, reduce wildfire risk, especially around the subdivisions and urban interface areas, Improve forest health, kind of helping us battle the southern pine beetle infestation and others that come in. The resiliency of the ecosystem and maintain that species diversity and habitat. You know, Chuck Will's willow is a denizen of the pitch pine forest. And if you haven't had a fire in a pitch pine forest in 100 years and the Chuck Will's willow lives there, Chuck Will's willow depends upon having some open habitat, some open patches in that fires have created over the years. So we need to have that kind of fire to increase native species diversity and maintain the species diversity. And overall reduces some ticks and forest diseases. So yeah, okay. And Polly, if you click then these other, you know, what we're doing here was all established very well in our comprehensive land use plan, as well as subsequent the fire management plan that came as a result of all the interagencies of over 40 agencies getting together after the 1995 fires, coming up with the Central Pine Barrens Fire Management Plan. This comprehensive fire management plan for prescribed fire is actually an offshoot of that April 1999 plan. And there we go. And there's our cover on there, January 2021, our comprehensive prescribed fire management plan. If you go to our website, you can download a copy of that. So moving on, there we go. What we did doing that comprehensive planning gave a good opportunity to really look at where we wanted to be. It gave us that long-term planning opportunity, and it drove that landscape scale kind of look at things instead of trying to write burn plans and do things on a small parcel by parcel basis. What we did in prioritizing where we needed to go, we said, first off, we could probably be writing burn plans and doing work in areas that have approved management plans that allow for prescribed fire to occur. We have other sites where we've had existing vegetation and fuel treatments areas, fire breaks. And so in some areas that maybe have minimal pre-fire treatment needs, we just want to maintain areas that have not yet become overgrown. A big concern was the WUI protections. And if you point there, Polly, if you start looking at from northwest up there, all the green areas are places that already on this chart have got burn plans written, including that one that Polly was just on, which is the south of Kearns. Most of the other green areas are all grassland areas that the state DEC has been burning for years. If you start moving over into Brookhaven there, you can see the Brookhaven National Lab site, which is all pine burns that they're just updating their burn plans for those, and we have an agreement with them. So we're hoping to get burning on Brookhaven National Lab lands this year. We looked at identifying a large zone in the Manaville Calverton Fire Management Unit, and actually since the time of this report, we've expanded that to include almost all the acres that are in the Otis Pike State Forest, both grassland and forested lands. So comprehensively, and including 700 acres of the Upton Reserve, which is a Brookhaven National Lab lands that are slightly east of the main compound campus of Brookhaven National Lab. As you look further to the east, you can see the Eastport whole area down in here, Eastport State Forest here, an area that has been neglected and burning in the last few years, and we're trying to revive that right now in cooperation with DEC. We also looked over here in the Southampton Fire Management Unit, both sides of the Sarnoff State Forest. We're talking about over 3,000 acres in the state forest there for potential burns in the future. We also looking at the state lands in the Dwarf Pines area. In the Dwarf Pines, that, mind you, the fire return interval in the Dwarf Pine is like 7 to 20, 25 years. And the last large fire that occurred in that portion of the Dwarf Pines was in 1955. And right where the label is says Dwarf Pines FMU, that area burned in 95. So it's due again too. So those were areas, the WUI protection areas, and that we really focused on. We also looked at the opportunity here of areas of recent wildfire. We come up with a concept about burning into black, both in expanding our prescribed fire areas. If we have some areas that have been mechanically treated and then we burn in them, we can subsequently burn to adjacent fuels that have not been mechanically treated because we'll be burning into black. We also looked at doing that in the same vein about using wildfires that occurred to burn into those black. Dwarf pines is a good example of the unique ecosystem needs of fires, prescribed fire, and training opportunities are always a high priority here for not only for trained wildland firefighters, but for getting training for our structural firefighter companies that have the authority and responsibility for a lot of fire suppression. Okay, Polly, we can move ahead on that one too now. And yes, succinctly put, we've got some areas that we've really targeted for this year. First off, we are looking at doing the south of Curran's Burn in Rocky Point. So we've got 123 acres there with a whole bunch of fire management units and 11 burn blocks within that. We also have three small 3-acre blocks that are called Demonstration Forest 1 that have been waiting to be burned for many, many years now. It's an area that was specially funded and on a federal level and established to say that combinations of mechanical treatment and prescribed fire, a demonstration area where people can view, visitors can come and view and see that. But we're going to be burning South Kearns woodlands. It's not too far away from there. And already this year that the DEC has been working on Rocky Point State Forest grasslands burning. We're looking at update in Brookhaven National Lab and hoping that Kathy Schwager there is hoping to burn multiple units in that area. We're in the process now. She's in the process of updating her fire management burn plan for an area of about, I think, total, I shouldn't even say it if not too sure. It's anywhere from 200 to 400 acres broken into numerous burn blocks that are out there. And then if you put it on this Sarnoff West is our other big target this year. 100 acres have been mechanically treated there in the northern end of that state forest. And we're looking at trying to get at least 50 acres of that burned this year. All right. Our prescribed fire program, we have the authority and ability under our contract with the state to lead our own. We are developed with the state funding grant that we've had. We've acquired a substantial amount of equipment and our insurance about covering it. We're totally in collaboration with all these other agencies that really the fire in here has always been a big collaborative interagency effort in the Central Pine Barrens. But we are again, our MOUs are a little bit more updated. We have our MOU now with Brookhaven National Lab. DEC is about to finalize an MOU with Brookhaven National Lab. We're working collaboratively on prioritizing and setting the priorities on what we really need to do for burn plans. And burn plan development, as I told my friends in DEC when I first got this job, the rangers, they're constantly juggling 17 different things every day of their lives at work. And when I got hired in this job, I only had one ball to juggle, and that was prescribed burning. So I've been here taking the leadership. I'm doing a lot of burn plan development, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as it goes down. The Central Pine Barrens has also been taking a big lead on outreach and education. And we've been working very collaboratively with the state on thinning mastication and putting in fire lines and breaks where needed. We will be taking more of a role in prescribed fire implementation starting with this year. We did a little bit of our independently, or at least taking the lead on it last year. And unless you're doing pre and post-fire monitoring to see if you've achieved the objectives that are set out in those burn plans, you're just a well-paid arsonist if you're not doing that monitoring. Moving ahead. Before I talk about those seasons on the left, I want to point out the pictures on the right, because we burned in this Rocky Point Demonstration Forest 2 on May 3rd, 2021. There's an active fire picture. And then 3 months later, you can see this is what the landscape looked like, and this is the recovery that we had. You can also see that when we start this program, as we go into this program, it's not just that we burn at once. There's going to be initial treatments, and then there'll have to be some maintenance kind of treatments in subsequent years. So, because you can see that kind of vegetative recovery that you've got already. I'd say this, going over to the left side of the slide, is that really our prescribed burn seasons, March is always kind of iffy. We have some good days and some not too good days. April and May are what we're really focusing on this year. In the fall, I'd say this, is being a Southern firefighter for most of my life. When I moved here, I kind of thought, okay, we got, spring fire season and a fall fire season. Well, if you look at the fire history, fires in October are almost unheard of in this ecosystem. It's August, it's July and August that are really those later season summer burns, and they occur on real drought cycles, and they're very important fires. They actually only 20% of the fires, 18% of the fires that have occurred in the last since 1930, they've accounted for 50% of the acres that we've had. So we do want to do some August burning. We can't burn in July and June and July because of restrictions due to the bat, northern long-eared bat. Winter, we look at some opportunities, especially if we have some kind of first entry burning where you want to do it under really moderate or mild conditions. Also, as the opportunity presents itself, maybe for a little bit of pile burning too. So that's a good way to scarify some pockets and create some mineral soil pockets in these forests. Okay. Succinctly to say that the burn plans that we've been doing, we took the leadership here, and it's now been duplicated on a statewide basis, that we're using the National Wildfire Coordinating Group National Burn Plan format, which by the structure of the plan really complies with all the Part 194 New York State requirements. The plans are developed by a prescribed burn boss, qualified, and/or someone who's had the proper training for prescribed burn planning. Once that plan is written, it's sent to an outside technical reviewer, so someone who has not had any kind of real input into creating the plan, and for them to look a good hard look at it and give us comments on that. Once we get those comments back and we finish up in our review and approval process, we finish within commission, finishing up the reviews and changes, their approvals. Then it goes on to New York State Region 1, DEC Region 1, where the wildlife biologists, forestry, and forest protection staff all have the opportunities to review that plan and approve what they see. From there, it goes on up to the directorate's office in the Albany State main office, and directors of lands and forests, forest protection, and fish, wildlife, and marine sources are authorizing officials. We have the burn plans as written lined up with 14 reviewing approval signatures on them. Everything is done in compliance with the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, and any necessary permits are obtained. The plans are written for a lifespan of 10 years, and we're emphasizing in these burn plans a mosaic of fire out there versus large area broadcast burning. So we're trying to punch holes in the forests rather than just burn over large tracts of forests. And we are definitely doing a monitoring pre-post to make sure that our objectives are being met. And that allows us then to tweak what we're going to do, tweak conditions under which we burn, modify plans if necessary to change and tweak prescriptions, etc. Some of the things that are in the plan, their goals, overall goals and objectives, what we're trying to achieve, what we've got out there as far as the landscape is concerned, and inventory of fuels, fuel analysis. We do use state-of-the-art modeling programs that we then do field verification on. I've been real pleased with some of the Behave 6.0 runs that I have put into these burn plans, and then I validated them when we burned in some of the forested areas this past spring. So felt good about that. Risk and hazard evaluation are all parts of the burn plan. Complexity of the burn, we're using the national process, NWCG burn complexity process, which calls for the burn plan preparer to go out and do, okay, what are the problems out here? And then once you give a complexity rating on that from initial view. And then what you do is you kind of write your burn plan to try to reduce the complexity. So you put in methodology or prescription variables and factors and staffing variables, and can reduce the complexity by tackling on. I mean, this Sarnoff burn plan that I've written is surrounded by highways and homes. So how do you manage the smoke in there? So you manage the smoke by burning small portions and by doing, immediate mop as you go techniques, mopping up as you go. You burn with good ventilation, good atmospheric ventilation. And you have the capability of monitoring and shutting down as soon as possible if there are any problems. Obviously, weather parameters are a big part of the prescription of a burn plan. Safety is a big part of every step of the burn plan. The notification processes are well identified in every burn plan. And then the special concerns, your smoke receptors and your threatened and endangered species or other habitats that you're worried about. And yeah, and so there on that right, you can see it's a pretty nice depiction of that 123 acres of that south of Currens woodlands burn unit. You could see the need for that when you talk about that urban interface. And we looked at those pictures earlier about all the different fires that have occurred in there since 1980. Over on the left side, you can look at how our process goes as far as operations. Pre-fire, we're doing some fuel manipulation, reducing fuels in certain areas, establishing control lines if we need those, and putting in some fire containment kind of lines and actions. The burn plans will all be done. The burns will all be implemented by qualified burn bosses, and definitely an interagency kind of environment to where we're sharing resources and leadership and skills on the line. Simply put, our operations, the days before a fire, we are starting our notifications process. We're monitoring weather, getting spot weather forecasts from the National Weather Service and Upton office. And you're preparing an action plan for direct resources on the day of the burn and getting our equipment staged and prepped. Days of, we got, okay, burn day notification. We are burning today. Reverse 911 calls go out to proximities defined by the burn boss. Putting out road signs where we need it, just letting people know that there's a prescribed burn ahead, like you see in that little sign there in the lower right. And then we're doing our ignition and our holding and our mopping up of the fire. And post burns, activities is that we're going to patrol a fire until it's declared out, even though certainly there may be some residual smoke on it for a day or two. We'll be out there patrolling that and mopping those little spots up and completing the required reporting of the burns that we do. All right. And so even though we've got some large areas that we're starting to write in these burn plans, what we do is one-day implementations. So, and we might have a burn block that is 25 acres. That doesn't mean we're going to burn the whole 25 acres, at least on one day. We are looking at patches versus broadcast. And if you look over here, here's our burn blocks on that south of Kearns unit. And and you can see that we can go in there and we can do some patch burning. So the patch burning, think about this. What we're trying to do is reduce fuel concentrations and fuel continuity. So if we can burn out patches that will break up the continuity of the fuels and tone down a wildfire, say that's coming in from the northwest toward the southeast, threatening those subdivisions, if they hit those patches that we have burned, the continuity is there, it's going to knock the fire down. Same token, these people are walking their dogs along those fire breaks that live in those subdivisions there. They're out there in those woods all the time. So we don't want to have a whole just burned up area saying, okay, everything here is burned. Having some patches gives us a mosaic on the landscape. And any ecologist knows mosaic is where it's at. Post-vegetation monitoring, doing immediately afterward, and then 3 to 6 months based on what time of the year that we burned. And again, just because we burned something once, for example, we burned this first burn block south of Kearns Field on September 27th last year. Really wasn't a really good burn day. I mean, it met the prescription parameters, but it really wasn't aggressive. We can go back and burn that again this spring under hotter conditions. So it's not a static thing. It's something that can be repeated on time and time again. There you go. All yours, Polly.
All right. Thank you, Bob. So education and outreach has been one of the prominent aspects of the fire program. We recognize that we don't and haven't had a culture of prescribed fire on Long Island, and we want to make sure through educational programming and outreach, similar to this presentation and some of these other things that we're doing, I'll talk about, that the community and the public realizes the importance of prescribed fire, and that's important to understand through understanding the ecology of the Pine Barrens. But then also, as Bob illustrated, how we have strict techniques and planning and training and staffing that is put into play in order to develop these burn plans and put fire on the ground. So the education and outreach is one of the important components as we go through the fire programming. So what you can expect for education and outreach day of is that everyone in the vicinity of where the prescribed fire operation will be occurring will receive a 911 call that is sent through the Suffolk County Fire and Emergency Rescue Service. So that provides one direct way of notifying. We also have different outreach material. We send out postcards to those homeowners at the beginning of the fire season. So we just sent out those postcards for Rocky Point Fire Management Unit, and also for the Southampton Fire Management Unit in preparation for the Sarnoff, Rocky Point, and south of Kearns burns that'll be occurring this spring. We have created a website. So you can go to our commission website and go to our work, Prescribed Fire Management, to learn more about the fire program. There is a video that we created as well that further illustrates what we're doing and what it's like to be on a burn. On our website as well is a mailing list. So the benefit of the mailing list, that when you join, is there's features in there where you can sign up to receive day before notifications of our prescribed fire operations based on the fire management unit that you live in. So even if you're already as a member of our mailing list, our general mailing list, if you would like to receive specific notifications that will go out just to your fire management unit, I encourage you to go to the sign up page on our website, click on that, and then insert your information for the fire management unit that you would like to receive information on. Further, we've created a couple different website, social media platforms. We're on Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page related to prescribed fire. So if you go to CPBC Fire and like that page, we also have a General Commission Facebook page, and we have a Rocky Point, Calverton, Manorville Community Wildfire Protection Plan page as well if you live in that area. On all of those pages will provide you with information on different Central Pine Barrens programming, but the fire pages will provide you with the updates and notifications and more relevant information on prescribed fire. So other ways that we're conducting education and outreach, we're working with the state to release a press release right now, highlighting this program. I think one aspect that we haven't shared that's very important is that this whole program has been made possible thanks to funding provided by the DEC. They provided us with a significant contract for 5 years to develop this program and do all the planning, the hiring of the staff, purchasing of the equipment so that we have a self-sustained program that can help further implement this prescribed fire from grasslands into the forest understory as we're illustrating here. So we also, so with that press release, it's a joint press release highlighting that contract award, but also that the state and the commission are working in joint partnership to implement prescribed fire for public safety and ecosystem benefit. We meet with each of the fire departments within the areas that we're burning so that they are informed of these operations. We talk about our tactics and the responses and the plannings. They help also further disseminate information on our prescribed fire programming through their newsletters, putting information on the signs, their digital signs out front, and any other ways that they can share that information. We've been giving presentations and hosting meetings on our fire program, similar to this one, and we've also have had information presented at tabling events. So if you have anyone out there has any programs, we're happy to give a presentation or put our information out at your tabling event. So shifting into what you can do to be sure that you're ready for the next wildfire, because as we've mentioned, it's not if there'll be another wildfire, but is when, is to be wildfire ready at home. And there's plenty of mitigation practices that you can do in and around your home to improve the resiliency to wildfire, including improving your landscaping techniques, so vegetation around your home, and also upfitting your buildings to reduce the potential for sparks to ignite wildfires around your home. So you want to create that defensible space by limiting the amount of vegetation that's up close near your home, removing leaves from around the edges of your home. You could fix your soffits to make sure that there's limited holes where sparks can come in, and also ensuring that your home and vents are fitted with small steel screening so that the sparks cannot land inside your home. And those are all different techniques that you can resist those ignitions. You know, it's generally thought that ignitions of homes in the landscape occur through direct contact with fire, but it's actually not from the flaming front, but the sparks that are thrown in advance of that flaming front that land in piles of leaves or get in your gutters or come into your windows and catch the paint and other fine materials that can carry the flame and start an ignition in your home. So there's plenty of website resources here. Online, we have a community-wise program on our website that has videos showing the difference between having those defensible spaces and mitigation practices implemented in your home. That, you know, it's a really powerful video to watch that. There's also homeowners guides, the FireWise program, and the National Fire Protection Association has a wealth of resources for you to view. So I really encourage anyone that owns a home in the Pine Barrens to really look at that information. And then related to the wildfire action plan. So it's not just preparing your home, but it's also preparing for an evacuation so that your pets, your animals, your family are all available and ready to be evacuated and that you have a plan. So the Ready, Set, Go program is also a resource that you can look into on how to set that preparation, similar to any other emergency evacuation that may occur here on Long Island. So if you live in the Ridge, Calverton, or Manorville area which is this boundary, we have a grant with the Forest Service. Once we had established this wildfire protection plan, that enabled the commission to apply for mitigation funding. And we received that grant. And so as part of that, we are providing free homeowners assessments where we'll come in and do an inspection and provide homeowners with a report of areas where they can improve the defensible space and provide mitigation measures to their home landscape. And from that report, any of those upfits that are made on your property, you would be eligible up to $5,000 to improve your home and or business in that accord. But you do need to live in the Ridge, Manorville, or Calverton Wildfire Protection Plan boundary. If you would be interested, you can reach out to communitywise@pd.state.ny.us. But even without this grant, as I illustrated in the prior slide, there's many different ways that you can learn about this program on your own. And I strongly encourage that. It's not only wildfire that we're looking to improve upon, but it also helps us with our prescribed fire activities further help protect your property from the impacts of wildfire. So let me go back there so that slide is there. And with that, that concludes our formal presentation, and we would open it up to anybody who has a question. If you want to raise your hand in the chat, or Maggie, if you would like to, or Maggie, I'm looking at, there's a Maggie joining us. I'm looking at on the screen. Sabrina, if there's anybody on the YouTube broadcast that posted any questions. So, anyone have any questions?
Doesn't look like any questions are coming in on YouTube.
All right. So
Maggie's
Maggie,
hands up.
all right.
Oh yeah, we've got one.
All right, Maggie, you should be
Hi.
unmuted.
So I have a question. So like, what kind of equipment do you need? Like, what materials are you bringing to the site of a prescribed burn? Like, fire trucks, like torches, protective equipment, ponytail holders, stuff like that.
All of the above. We've recently purchased and put into service. We've gotten 2 of the largest kind of UTVs that they make, the utility terrain vehicles, that are really are fire engines. They have 100-gallon tanks on board. They have a gas pump on there that is capable of pumping,
Yeah,
good deal
I
of
have a
hose.
picture here we can share.
Yeah. So we use those. We use other standard wildland fire engines here. So yeah, there's our Polarises there with the with the slip-on unit there and a 100-foot hose reel, gas pumps. They even have up in the front bumper, they have built-in sprinklers that can be operated by a lever by the driver of the vehicle, so that they could be pumping and rolling and spraying, putting out fire, or even putting out wet line ahead of it. A variety of hand tools, everything from big rubber flappers that are really good for smothering fire in grassland environments, to the classical, Pulaski hand tool, which is a combination of a grubbing tool and an axe blade. We use chainsaws, power blowers. We use backpack pumps that are, you put 5-gallon pack on your back, weighing about 45 pounds, and you carry that out there and just manually pump that and squirt water on the fire. Central Pine Barrens is also, in the process of acquiring a larger engine, have 500-gallon 400, 500 gallon tank on it. We work with state DEC that has a 750 gallon tank on one of their engines. So a whole lot of stuff out there, Maggie.
Mhm.
And this is a
Nice.
picture here of just, some of the people on a burn, with a drip torch. We have fire pack where we carry
Mhm.
our fire shelter, and our, gloves. We have hard hats. We have special clothing that we wear that's flame retardant. So, to protect ourselves, and we carry water and other tools on us in the field.
So would you let the fire burn completely? Like, is there a duration of time, minutes and hours that the fire is going, or do you guys put it out with water, or
Well,
extinguish the fire, or you let it kind of go out on its own?
for the most part, we kind of let it go out on its own. What we'll do, the basics, if you go back to that previous picture, the basics of what you do off of some kind of holding line. In this case, we're on a 20-foot wide plowed dirt fire break, right?
Mhm.
So fires, we call it the fire triangle. Fires require three things to burn. They require fuel, so the fuels that you see in the wildland environment, which is the vegetation. They require heat, so we provide the heat by igniting them with the torches and things like that. And a fire requires oxygen to burn.
Mhm.
So when structural firefighters put out fires, they go inside buildings and they spray water, which makes it cool, takes away the heat.
Mhm.
The mist takes away the oxygen. In the wildland environment, the most way about putting out fires is to deprive it of fuel. So that's where firefighters, when they build a hand line, scraping out a hand line, if we're bulldozing hand lines, right, deprives the fire of fuel. In the case of what you're looking at there, initially when we light, we're going to let the good side of the fire burn into that burn unit. And the bad side of the fire, which is this edge against the line, that's something we're going to snuff out pretty immediately. So we'll snuff that out with hand tools, with water, with an engine, a hose lay, or we'll just let it burn itself out. It burns out the fuel and it burns over to that dirt that can't burn, and it goes away. Fire's out. The other side, the other side of the fire is going to have another hand line or another kind of control feature on it. We'll light over there, so fire is burning into fire. But to answer your question, we try to let it burn enough to where it's going to consume. It's important in these pine barrens to try to consume some of the organic duff that is built up, to expose mineral soil, to allow for germination of pitch pine seedlings, and other herbaceous plants that come out into a more first level disturbance, first order disturbance, first succession habitat after a burn. But because of smoke generation, et cetera, then you also reach a point where you say, okay, we've got to put the remaining fire out so we can decrease the amount of smoke that we're possibly putting on nearby roads or communities.
Any other questions, Maggie? Those are great questions.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? Sabrina, were there any in the YouTube?
Nope.
All right. The last call for questions. Perfect. All right. Well, we thank everybody for attending today and listening to all about what the Central Pine Barrens is doing related to our prescribed fire program. And we will, if you live around the Pine Barrens in some of these burn units, so you should have already received your postcard, or you shall be receiving it soon. So we take care, everyone, and have a good evening.